the Rex Bear Leak Project. How the heck are you? I have Matthew LaCroix with us at the Leak Project. Now, we're going to talk about Planet 9, the secrets of Planet 9, the secrets of the solar system. I think it's pioneer data and also different satellite images and data on satellites that not many people know about. We're going to look at slides and information, and really excited to have you on the program. How the heck are you?
Hey, Rex, it's awesome to be back on here. We have some of the best conversations that I have, so I'm always excited to be back. Oh, you're on mute for a second.
We were getting some gremlins there for a minute. They're gone for now. The gremlins are gone. Let's, first of all, you are the author of The Illusion of Us. That's done very well on Amazon. Definitely a great book. I've got an autographed copy. Really excited about that. There's a lot of speculation about Planet 9 and what Planet 9 actually is, if it's a binary star. Why don't you give us the information that you have on Planet 9?
Okay, so before I jump into that, I just want to update everyone on what's going on and why I'm doing this show with you right now. To me, the most important thing, regardless of all the little things that influence us along the way, we should always be objectively looking for truth, no matter what. And at the end of the day, that's where I stand. And so some of this data will conflict with some of my earliest, some of the things that I've done a couple of years ago. But I've since, been really looking in and delving into this stuff, because I'm in the middle of finishing the next book. And this, to me, is going to be the most important work of my career, because it's very data driven, and it gets into, rather than just having someone's opinion on what's going on, what actually is the proof after, theories and hypotheses have then provided. And that's what the next book is. And I wanted to give the updated name of it because I have tinkered with the subtitle and name a few times. But so this next book that I'm working on that delves into this data we're about to review right now is called The Stage of Time: The Secrets of Reality, Ancient History, and War of the Eagle and Serpent Gods Over Earth. And now, Rex, you and I both know all about the eagle and serpent stuff. We've done a lot of talks about that. And so this book is going to delve into understanding both reality as well as our solar system and topics like Planet 9, like we're going to go over right now in a few minutes. Because as I was getting into, again, the data of it all and really looking into the facts of what are these terms Nibiru specifically referencing? What is the term Planet X referencing, now called Planet 9? What is causing all of these cyclic actions of asteroids and comets hitting the Earth and causing these mass extinctions and these ice ages and then these crashes of temperatures and all these different changes? What keeps causing all of these events like that? So that's where this is going to go. And the problem is there has been some misinformation that's occurred, and there's been kind of two unfortunate outcomes to that. One, for the researcher who doesn't really study and look at cuneiform writings and doesn't do their homework, if they hear that some things have been mistranslated, a lot of times there's a logical conclusion that comes that everything's been mistranslated. So this show is going to be about what is the truth about our solar system, and what is the truth about these gods of history that, the Nag Hammadi scriptures called the rulers of reality, and known as the Archons, and others have called the Anunnaki, like the Sumerians. There's a lot of names for them. So we're going to go over those things today. And really, to me, we need to protect the truth, because right now, I think the truth it's in some ways it's more open than it's ever been, but in other ways it's more at jeopardy than it's ever been, because there's so much misinformation that's attacking it from so many sides. So that's why I really want to clarify some of this information today, Rex. So I'm going to share some. Go ahead, Rex.
Yeah, so you're going to share some slides, and I really appreciate that. I can't wait to get into that. I'll just give you the mic and let you roll with it, because that's, when you get in the zone, man, you're in the zone, and I love it. People are like, yeah, he's just going. I've got popcorn, I'm popping popcorn and stuff like that. And so first of all, Planet X, Planet 9. And what is Planet X? Well, there's definitely a Planet X. And actually, if you go back to 1845, there were 11 planets that have now, some of them have been downgraded and such. So it's fascinating if you go throughout history, how many different planets and how the planets have changed. And if you look at one side of science, you could actually say there's hundreds of planets in our solar system and with the new discoveries and such. And then you talk about Nibiru and what Nibiru really is, the 3,600-year cycle. So I really can't wait to get into that. I've often wondered, especially recently, if Planet 9, that Michael Brown has done an incredible job, and also people like Badagen and others have discovered these incredible planets, and I think they're just brilliant minds. I'd love to get them on the program and talk to us as well, like a roundtable. But maybe it's a binary star. And then I thought to myself, well, maybe Saturn at one point, because I made a great connection yesterday, and I can't wait to get your thoughts on this. You might even bring it up. Saturn, Shamash, the 8-pointed star, Sumerian tablets. As I've told people before, Zechariah Sitchin wasn't the one that created summer, folks. Or the civilization was around far before him, and there's been plenty of scholars that have done translations on that Zechariah Sitchin has done different translations on as well. So just because he missed some things doesn't mean he was wrong with everything, and it doesn't mean he created the Anunnaki, because, you know, they've been around, and there's been people that have researched the Anunnaki before he was even born. So I just wanted to interject with that, and let's rock and roll, man.
I think that's great, Rex. Thanks for bringing some of those points up, because those are obviously going to be things that I'm going to be discussing soon here. So let's jump into some slides, because I think visuals can really help with a lot of this information. All right. All right. Can you see that, Rex?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So let's begin by reviewing a little bit of information about our solar system. We've now defined planets by whatever their particular mass is, along with moons that orbit them. And the really interesting thing about planets like Pluto is that it has multiple moons that orbit around it. But yet, because of the definitions we've come up with, it's no longer considered a planet, which is interesting if you think about it. And that bears the question, what really is out there? If there's something far beyond past Pluto that's causing disruptions to our solar system, well, what is it? And what are these terms, these different terms defined for? And that's what I wanna review right now and really look at. So let's start with a few facts. If we're going to go over a reading at the end to talk about some of this real proof behind some of these events that occurred in the past, like the Atrahasis, which is one of my favorite cuneiform writings of all time. And in the Atrahasis, it talks about how there was this great deluge in the past that wiped out a significant amount of the human beings that were on the planet, and that even these gods may have helped. Either they knew it was going to happen, or they helped send this destruction to our planet. And all these stories that echo from cultures all across the world in the Bible, talking about how tremendous disasters occurred with floodwaters reaching up into the mountains and all these different events. And then if you start studying ancient history of Earth, you learn that there have been these cycles of extinctions that have occurred over and over and over again, where life had to almost completely start over, which, by the way, getting into some shows that Rex and I have talked about in the past, through the incorrect teachings of Darwinism, that would have been impossible to have life be wiped off a planet, which it did, our planet, from huge strikes of comets and asteroids, leading to planetary, huge climate disruptions for potentially hundreds, if not longer, amounts of time on our planet. And so, but every time life miraculously bounced back to millions and millions of species, which of course I absolutely believe is from beyond here, and we're more of it's a colony of library of species from around potentially all over our galaxy or solar system. I think that's how we should view Earth. It's just, so if you have this planet Earth that's having these cycles of destruction over and over and over again, there has to be some catalyst for it. It just can't be a random thing that keeps happening. And furthermore, if you look at ice core samples from Greenland and you look at soil samples from northern Canada, you can see that there are these specific events that happened that correspond to these ancient writings. So there are these absolute hard pieces of evidence that occur that exist for the fact that there's these disasters that have occurred that correspond with these ancient writings that have been left all over the world. And so we then need to figure out why that happened. And those events look like they happened between, well, there was actually multiple events happened between 10 and 12,800 years ago. So what caused that? And that's what we're going to get to in this show right now. So I want to start by pointing out that some people have seen some of these really neat articles that came out the last couple of years about the Inuit native tribes up in northern Canada, who their entire livelihood is not based on electronics and GPS devices like we have. They still live out in the wilds, and they hunt and they fish and they use the stars to navigate. And so they represent one of the those types of tribes and people that are secluded and use the stars. They represent some of the best experts we have for understanding what potentially could be changing. And one of the interesting things that came from that last couple of years was the Inuit came out and they said that all of the elders are extremely alarmed because a lot of the stars that they used specifically to follow certain pathways, following north and to guide them, have shifted. And like the entire sky is actually shifted. And they bring that up. And of course, scientists are like, no, that's not true. Everyone's, they're just, look at them. They don't know what they're talking about. So some people just disregarded it and while others paid attention. And the Inuit were onto something. Okay. They were absolutely right. There has been, and as Rex knows, there's been a shift in the earth, a slight shift. And why is that the case? Well, what is causing that? And when you actually look at our entire solar system, looking at the data from it, you see that the entire solar system is skewed and shifted. Something is offsetting all of the planets in our entire solar system. Some gravitational force. And of course, I know that there are flat Earth people and people that say gravity doesn't exist. But I got to strongly point out that if gravity
you don't exist either, Matt.
Yeah. If gravity didn't exist, every planet would just fly out and disappear into the vast cosmos. There would actually be complete chaos and everything would fall apart if it wasn't gravity. Gravity is like the glue that holds all of the mathematical precision of the universe together. Okay. So let's just get past that right away. So that means that some kind of gravitational force is affecting our solar system. Now, this is where we get into somewhat of a tricky area because there's been a large amount of data in it and people that have, including me at one point, who have followed certain calculations and names for certain references and have woven those into the fabric of our understanding. And so when I was researching and getting ready to write this next book and doing a lot of research, I've really been looking hard into what is the truth of our solar system and what is the truth of Nibiru. And so that's what I want to go over right now. But like Rex said, just because something was mistranslated does not mean that everything's mistranslated. It's a very important fact to bring up. And I think it's an important one that we really want to remember here.
And one thing I wanted to ask you too before you brought that up also, Matt, was I'm thinking about many of the depictions throughout various cultures and religions and timelines of what looks like a spaceship, the winged disc. And oftentimes you'll see Anu, Enki, Enlil flanking Anu as well, but it's different. It's Shamash. And that means if it comes from Saturn, and then you look at Iapetus, you look at Mimas, which they look very similar to the Death Star. I mean, you can look at these giant hexagon panels. You can look at the possibility of them being remains of a Type 2 civilization, of an ancient civilization. You look at for example, Return of the Jedi, the Death Star, there's a specific they're like rebuilding the Death Star in Return of the Jedi. There's this huge blast site. Well, you look at Iapetus, and it has the exact same area on the moon that has been damaged. And then also it has a 12-mile high, 12-mile wide radius that goes around the circumference of the planet, which would make you think maybe it's some type of CERN technology, Hadron Collider that's going around creating a giant laser that comes out of it. But it's from Saturn. And so, what are your thoughts on the depiction of the Shamash of this what looks like a craft, and then you can clearly see the difference between that and the depictions of planetary objects and alignments in the stars?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, because one of the things that people that study research these ancient cuneiform writings and how they wrote in parables and symbolism, they'll realize that it's very difficult to take a lot of the things they showed and try to take them completely for face value in a linear way. It's almost as if you have to look at everything and say, is this symbolic to show something else, or is it trying to be literal? And that's what you should always do when you're looking at these writings. Like when I'm going to do the reading of the Atrahasis later, there's some information in there that I think some people have glossed over that literally like explains our reality. And that's one of the things that I'm talking about in the stage of time a lot, is that they love to hide information very cleverly, using different words and things like that. Now, and so let's bring up the important thing you brought up. I think that the winged planet, it's either referencing two things. One, which I think is the most likely solution, is that it's referencing this metamorphosis of the ascension of Earth, and the fact that Earth and humanity is part of this ascension of consciousness process. And don't think that human beings, years and years and years down the road, reach this higher stage of our consciousness and then the Earth never changes. We are part of the same process. That's what the Mayans were talking about. It's about energy, and it's about going through different through our galactic center, and it's about far more than we realize. And so we are, Earth and humanity is embarking on reaching higher stages of consciousness, which means higher dimensions. And that means that these wings, look at the Caduceus symbol, the interwound serpents with the wings at the top. That's this metamorphosis symbol that shows the change. And the wings are always just like the feathered serpent into the dragon. It's just they're just representing this metamorphosis of wings, and ascension is always what wings are. Now, even though I just said that, it's very interesting, and this is one of the conclusions that I've come up with. If you read the Enuma Elish and you read about how it really strongly shows that there was some kind of destruction in our solar system in the past, and I absolutely believe that's true. Not referencing Nibiru, but referencing specifically this name of Tiamat and what was probably the ancient Earth. And today, if you look at our solar system, you can see that between Mars and Jupiter, there is an asteroid belt. And the reason there's an asteroid belt there, you have to think logically here. Something caused that asteroid belt to be created. And that was likely this planet Tiamat. And Earth was thrown to the orbit it's in now because of some disaster that occurred during this time. And I've postulated in the book that I think whatever caused, like you were saying, whatever caused this destruction of this planet was either two things in my mind. It was either some kind of technology that did it, because it's no longer there anymore, right? So there's no rogue planet still flying around there. Or it was an object that's no longer there anymore. It could be sucked up by Jupiter, or it's just part of what remains of the asteroid belt. And that's, to me, what would make the most logical sense based on the evidence we have. And so I want to get into the term Nibiru, because that's a very, very interesting area that there's been so much infighting over. So basically, Zechariah Sitchin translated a lot of these Sumerian tablets, and the term Nibiru came up in the Enuma Elish and several other places like the Mulapin and on these other cuneiform writings. But here's what's so difficult about the term Nibiru. These Anunnaki gods, which are very real, that came here long, long ago, they're obsessed with honor and having titles. They have to be represented by something powerful. And there's nothing more important to be represented by than the planets of our solar system. So when people see the references back to these these names linkages to these Anunnaki, it is not simply metaphorical. They chose those planets, and this is why I'm discussing this right now. So if they choose planets based on their title, then what would be the obsession be, right? The biggest planet, the one that has the most influence on our solar system, and that would be Jupiter. So what happened is that there were two Anunnaki gods named Enlil and Marduk. Now, Marduk was Enki's firstborn son, and Enki is Enlil's brother, half-brother, actually. So right there, you have this conflict. Now, Marduk decided he wanted to challenge Enlil for the title of Nibiru, which is if you look and you look into what it actually says about it. I'm gonna do a reading really quick here to show that. If you look into that, you see that they mention both the name of Enlil and Marduk for Nibiru. Okay, that's a tricky area because you're trying to figure out why that would be. So there's a Babylonian writing called the Mulapin. Really interesting. I don't know if you know about this one, Rex, but this is one of the quotes from it. It states, and remember what I was talking about, that symbolic terms. Don't always take everything exactly literal. And it states, when the stars of Enlil have been finished, one big star, although the light is dim, divides the sky in half and stands there. And look at this the chart that I have up while I'm reading this. That's the star of Marduk, Nibiru, Jupiter. It keeps changing its position and crosses the sky. Now, the term that's the most important of that entire reading I just said is right at the end where it says, it keeps changing its position. Now, on the literal sense, you'd be like, does that mean the planet keeps changing its orbit? No, changing its position. What does position mean? It means title, ruling. And if you look at how the Marduk and Enlil were fighting over, and they're not the only two gods that fought over planets. There's other ones that fought over them as well. Neptune and Venus, I think, were being fought over as well. So Jupiter was being fought over by Enlil and Marduk, because Marduk at the time was trying to become the supreme leader of the gods. Long ago, when this event that occurred that destroyed Tiamat or whatever happened to the proto-Earth, he claimed the victory for that. And because of that, he considered himself the leader of the gods. And it's interesting when you look at each of these roles that these Anunnaki beings play. Marduk, being the leader of the gods, seems to have played the dividing role between both of them. So if you want to say what defines Marduk, that's a tricky question. He seems like he's playing both roles depending on what age of the zodiac we're on. Okay, so I don't want to diverge too far off this here. But this is what's interesting about
Marduk real quick, if I can, though, because Marduk I would think of as Mars, the god of war, but also when you read through the Enuma Elish, or at least there's the 7 tablets of creation at the end, Marduk ends up usurping up all the power and taking over the sun. So what are your thoughts?
Taking over the sun, I think, is referencing him taking over the Anunnaki. I think Marduk and Enlil have been fighting for essentially thousands of years to be in control of these great beings, but more importantly, to be in control of Earth. It's a lot more important than people realize. We're not just some random planet in the cosmos that has the same thing going on that everything else does. I don't believe that's true. That doesn't mean that we're an isolated event. I think that Earth and humanity is very important. And you can see that especially in the Emerald Tablets, and Thoth really talks about. So this is really kind of amazing if you consider for a moment. If Jupiter represents this crossing, okay, this balancing of energy, this crossing of between the two, the energy of our solar system, as well as possibly even some kind of divide between dimensions. You should read some of the stuff that talks about the significance of what the role that Jupiter plays. But basically, it's very interesting because Jupiter is the only planet in our solar system that has such a large mass that it actually shares the entire orbital hold and path of our solar systems and the way the path that each planet takes, both Jupiter and the sun play this connected role in that. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why Jupiter is very important. It, like it says, it divides the sky and it holds all the stars together. When they refer to stars, they don't simply refer to suns in these writings. Stars are always the terms they use for planets too, which is interesting that we use the term star now for celebrities, isn't it? I think that's related. And we're going to get into some data here in a second. But so basically, it means that, like I read the Mula pin a second ago, it keeps changing its position. Okay, and so you get these two gods of Marduk and Enlil fighting over having the title of Jupiter, and they reference it in many places as Nibiru. Okay, so I think that the argument is over on that. If you go and look at all the places that it talks about what that is and what its role is, I think it's Nibiru is referencing Jupiter. Now, there's a term, and it's going to come up in the reading of the Atrahasis at the end. There's a number called 3,600 that comes up in a lot of writings. And again, I think Zecharia Sitchin is a brilliant man. He got a lot right. But I think because he was one of the first ones to try to put all this together, he saw these extremely conflicting and difficult to translate areas, and he tried to make the best sense of it as he could. And he saw this reoccurring number of 3,600. And he saw this name Nibiru, and he thought that meant that Nibiru has an elliptical orbital path of 3,600 years that sends it through that same place of our asteroid belt. Now, the truth is that wouldn't be possible because it would cause way too much destruction in our solar system, as well as the fact that there's a lot of other mathematical problems to that. But now, let's get that out of the way. Having said that, there is absolute hard evidence to show that Planet 9, which used to be called Planet X, exists. Because the reason it was called Planet X is because when Pluto used to exist, it was the 10th planet. But now, because of the demotion of Pluto, we're now calling this object Planet 9. But I'm still referencing both the terms of Planet X and Planet 9 because a lot of places call that historically. And so we're just, whenever I use those terms, they're interchangeable. So they mean the same thing, okay? So let's get into some of this data that proves what actually is out there in our solar system that's been causing a lot of problems, which is very real. And as you brought up early in the show, Rex, the search for this planet goes all the way back to 1846. That's how long ago astronomers have been looking for some kind of an object that's causing the disruptions to the orbits, especially of the outermost planets, because they're the closest to this object. But it's yeah.
And let me just add one thing to that. And also, if you go back to 1801 and 1802, there were several planets that were discovered in the Kuiper Belt that they did classify as planets, and now they've been demoted to dwarf planets. So the Planet X hypothesis, one thing that's difficult, Matt, that I got to throw out there, because there's been so many planets that have been discovered, they'll come up with just, it's Ceres, it's Aries, it's X92744 X cubed, and you're like, oh, dude, is that the new smartphone that just came out? So you can't, they never really can they're never going to go, oh, Planet X is here, because every time they do, next week it's, oh, that wasn't Planet X, that was just a giant Chinese lantern.
Exactly. You're right. I mean, it's like the term has become polluted. And we're going to go over the data that's going to prove that we know the relative size of it. So we know that it's not a dwarf planet, okay? We know a lot more than maybe some realize based on the signatures that they have. Again, gravity leaves a wonderful signature in terms of what its effects are is determined by its mass. So you can determine the mass of an object even if you have no idea exactly where that object is. Or if you have a relative understanding of where it is, you can determine quite a few things. And so in 1930, they discovered Pluto. And they initially thought that Pluto was the object that was responsible for this tilt of Neptune and Uranus. Okay, so they wanted to blame all these things on Pluto, except that when in 1978, they figured out the mass of Pluto based on the moon Charon that they found, and they could determine the mass of the planet, and they realized it was one of these dwarf planets, and it couldn't possibly be responsible for all these disruptions. So what is? Well, this is where we get into some data I love. You know, people can say all they want about mistranslations and stuff, but you can't ignore a lot of this hard data. And I got to also say something too. I start going into this data, and it's somewhat loosely connected to NASA, and immediately everyone starts rolling their eyes and saying nothing is ever true that comes out of this, and that space isn't real, and that all of it's fake. And listen, there is a lot of truth that exists. There's just certain things that have been misled to us, like life in the universe and aliens and all these things. But that doesn't mean that everything they say is fake. Okay, there is hard data that can still be found. It's just the stuff that's really good that exists is NASA just buries it. And we're going to show some of that today. Stuff that most people have never even heard of. And it took a long time for me to even come across it through other researchers or just doing research. Okay, so in 1972 and then 1973, NASA launched what was called Pioneer 10 and then Pioneer 11. However, Pioneer 10 is really what I want your attention to be focused on. Pioneer 10 represents probably the most significant data we have for the solar system of any probe that we've ever sent out before. And they've never sent another probe that direction, by the way, again, until the most recent one, we'll talk about in a few minutes. So they launched this Pioneer 10 probe because NASA and the astronomical community knew. They knew that there was mathematical data proving that something was disrupting the orbits of our solar system and Uranus and Neptune specifically. Something was tilting it out there. So they know that. Okay, so they say, okay, what is it? We need to figure it out and find this thing. So they sent Pioneer 10 and then they sent Pioneer 11. And they sent them both in different directions because they wanted to find it. Now, I put a little diagram on so you can see what these Pioneer probes had equipped on them. They were actually extremely sophisticated pieces of technology, especially for the time period that they were used. And they could obviously planetary bodies, if they're not a sun, often don't have anything that illuminate them. So you have to have some kind of an infrared capability to be able to see them based on heat. Heat, it turns out, is one of the most effective means of finding a planet, as long as the planet has some kind of a source of heat, right? So NASA sends out these probes, and because they wanted to identify what these anomalies were, and they ended up getting back images in 1983. And I think, Rex, you've seen one of these from a long time ago. They showed some kind of an object that had atmosphere being blown off it, or some kind of a strange object that they saw. And I know some may remember a long time ago that there was actually an area on Google Space, the program, where they had it like blacked out. And a lot of people pointed that out. And then all of a sudden, years later, that area became uncovered. And there was this same type of strange looking planetary object, that it was the same looking signature that had been seen in 1983 from the Pioneer probe. Okay. And so they realized that it's there. Okay. But that's all we found out, because the data from the Pioneer 10 probe was used by NASA and astronomers, and it was not released to the public, except for one place. And we're going to show that in a minute. It's actually, to be honest, it's pretty wild evidence. Even for me, I still get excited looking at it. But so in 1992, NASA actually gave a press announcement. That's long enough ago that most people don't even remember it. But NASA actually said this in a press announcement where they were going to tell that this planet existed. And this is what they actually said, and I quote, "Unexplained deviations in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune point to a large outer solar system body of 4 to 8 Earth masses on a highly tilted orbit beyond 7 billion miles from our sun." Okay? Now, that information that they said in that little press release has actually proven to be incredibly accurate all the way until today. So I want you to remember that quote, because as far as I can see on all the data that we're about to go through, they were pretty much spot on when they gave that press announcement. That means that this planet is 4 to 8 Earth masses. It's rather large. It's nothing like the size of Jupiter, but it's a large planet. And that's why it has the ability to have such an impact on our solar system. Okay. So let's get into some of this amazing evidence. If you want to try to say you're someone who really questions stuff, this is going to be a challenge for you to question. Because when I just said the Pioneer 10 probe that was sent out, it recorded data, not just that image, that infrared image that Rex has seen of some kind of a winged disk planet, but it recorded specific scientific evidence data of anomalies and what they found out there. Now, anyone who studied the story of what is supposed to exist out in our outer solar system, they find out there's the idea behind this binary star, that we have some kind of an old binary star, and that's why this planet is in our outer solar system and all these things. And this Pioneer data proved that. It absolutely proved that. Because if you look at what this Pioneer data showed, it actually shows not only where each probe went, but it shows specifically the exact distances that they discovered these anomalies. And so this is what I don't even give you. I'm going to give you some information about what this is. I'm sorry, I got excited. I skipped over it. This is the 1987 New Illustrated Science and Invention Encyclopedia, Volume 18. And this is on page 2,488. So as Rex knows, these big encyclopedias from back in the day, this is before the capabilities of the internet. So this was where information was. Encyclopedias that was the standard. And here we have this encyclopedia where I like to think of it as whoever, I don't know the story behind it, I can't find the information, but someone either didn't get the memo or they decided to publish this anyway. Because this data from Pioneer Probe 10 data wasn't published. And there's obviously a reason why it wasn't published if you look. But it has a little quote at the bottom that doesn't mention anything about what it found. Isn't that interesting too, Rex? The actual article in the piece and the description mentions nothing about what it found. Okay? Only the picture does. It's like they weren't allowed to say anything, but they like threw the picture in. And this is what it says. Pioneer 10 probe became the first craft to pass interstellar space in 1983. Remember, Rex, 1983 is when those images came back. So it all correlates. The diagram shows the path of the two Pioneer probes. Now look at the bottom of Pioneer 11. If you can see that it was sent to the, you could call it south if we're just looking at a reference point, but it went the complete wrong way, obviously, and it found nothing. Okay, that's why I say Pioneer 11 isn't even important. But Pioneer 10 hit the jackpot. It found not only the 9th planet, which it called Planet 10 because of Pluto at the time, remember? We thought that was a planet. So obviously this is really called Planet 9. But not only did it find this Planet 9, but it found, and this is the only reference I've ever seen anywhere in astronomical data, where it found our binary star. And it lists it right there. And not only did it find our binary star, but it says a dead star, which is mind-blowing because that's exactly what is supposed to have occurred. And the story is, long ago, millions to billions of years ago, we don't even know exactly how long ago, because solar systems are all moving, they're all slightly moving at their own speeds. And because of the effects of gravity based on suns and how large they are, if something gets just close enough, it can be nudged into another solar system. It's pretty wild to think about, but that's called an intruder solar system, and it's very real. And that's what looks like it happened to our solar system. And it is the reason why we've had so much destruction, not only in Earth's history, but in the solar system's history as well. And so I want you to look at this and remember it and go research it yourself, because it's honestly
what encyclopedia is this, Matt?
It's called, yeah, absolutely. Let me read it again just so everyone has it. It's called the New Illustrated Science and Invention Encyclopedia, Volume 18. And this is on page 2,488. If you look that up, you'll find plenty of places online that now have that.
Oh yeah, I remember reading that one just the other day. Yeah, that page and everything.
Okay, so now we have some really important data to go by. In this, remember, this is from 1983. That's when Pioneer probe passed and got these this data from. So what that means is in 1983, or roughly around that time period, Planet 9 was 4.7 billion miles from Earth. Okay, and this dead star was 50 billion miles. So a really, really long way out there. And that's why no one can see them. And that's why there's this strange tilt to our entire solar system, okay, from this outer area. Now, the important thing to understand here is that what is a dead star? As a star gets older, it eventually starts to die, as in it loses the fusion core it has. And eventually it'll turn into what's known as a red or a dwarf star. And that just means that it's a much older sun. Now, right there, that's a little bit of a clue, isn't it? If these Anunnaki are supposed to be ancient beings and they're maybe connected to this planet somehow, then it's very interesting to note that this star is potentially far older than our sun. This sun, who knows how old it actually is and where it came from, right? Because it was grabbed by our sun, which is much larger, and it got stuck way out in our far outer solar system, beyond the Kuiper Belt. And that's what some of the things we're gonna talk about right here. If you look at the diagram one more time before I get into it, the Kuiper Belt exists just beyond the orbits of Neptune. Okay, so it's like a giant ring of asteroids and comets around our inner solar system. Okay, so in 1992, astronomers actually, so we didn't even realize, okay, if you think about it for a minute, how we think we know what we're talking about around our solar system, except we didn't even discover the Kuiper Belt until 1992. That's not even that long ago, is it? That's amazing to consider, because how would we know what occurred during all these events if we didn't even know there was a giant asteroid and comet field that existed? Because as I was saying before, there really is hard data to show that these massive asteroid and comet strikes have been the primary cause of a lot of these extinctions and events that have occurred in the past. And if we didn't even know that the Kuiper Belt existed, how would we even consider that into the hypothesis? Now, I want to give you a little bit of information about the Kuiper Belt. It basically, if you look at this image I have up, it doesn't even show our asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter because it's so small in comparison. Now, small doesn't mean small. There's still plenty of destructive things that could come from our little tiny asteroid belt. But I'm trying to give you a scale here. The Kuiper Belt is determined to be 100 to 200 times as many objects. I mean, we're talking about a massive, massive, massive area of asteroids and comets that for some reason exist way outside of on the very edges of our solar system, okay? And it's estimated that there are over 100,000 comets and asteroids. Okay, I mean, so it's like mind-blowing to consider, and it really starts to make sense why so many objects were likely thrust and thrown our direction for millions of years because of this very thing. So now, what are some of the scientists that have looked into this? We just had something recent within the last year or so from Caltech that's talking about Planet 9. That's the most recent data. But what about before? Well, there's a very important astronomer that very few have ever heard of. They've heard of who I'm going to speak about after, but not this first one, I guarantee. This first man's name, his name is Thomas van Flandern, and I would like you to remember his name. He's more important than some may realize. So Thomas van Flandern he was an American astronomer, and let's just say he became very frustrated with not only the astronomical data that he was seeing, but reality itself. And he gave an incredible quote in the 1980s. And the last book I wrote is called The Illusion of Us, The Suppression and Evolution of Human Consciousness. And the book I'm writing right now is called The Stage of Time. And we're really just dealing with the fact that the reality that we've been given is not actually real. As in, it's a manufactured reality. Whereas there are certain things, as in how old do we go far back? How old does the mankind's origins go back? What about life in the universe? All these things, they're not what we've been told. And so Thomas van Flandern is this high profile astronomer in the upper echelons of the community that they have, and he was basically disowned because of what he started to say. And he gave a quote in the 1980s that I want to read. It's absolutely fantastic. He said, and this is really echoes so much of my work: "Events in my life caused me to start questioning my goals and the correctness of everything I had learned. In matters of religion, medicine, biology, physics, and other fields, I came to discover that reality differed seriously from what I'd been taught." So he just basically has to start over, and he's trying to figure out what is actually real and all these things. And he gets a hold of some of the data from Neptune and Uranus, because remember, he's an astronomer. So he wants to know what is out there. He's reading about, Nibiru and all these things that there could be another planet out there. And he wanted to know the truth. So he wanted to find data. So he contacted his friend that many more have probably heard of, named Robert Harrington. Okay. And together they led the conquest that would further the studies and evidence that would lead to where we are today. So Robert Harrington who's on the right, Thomas van Flandern's on the left. Robert Harrington, he was an astronomer. He was actually the head astronomer at the U.S. Naval Observatory. Okay, so high profile figure, and he was friends with Flandern. So Flandern comes up to him and is basically sitting down with him and saying, "Look at this data proving that something's perturbing the orbits of Uranus and Neptune as well as our solar system. Let's figure out what this is. You have connections in NASA, and we can figure out based on data." And so Harrington he's friends with Flandern, and he happens to be very open-minded. And he actually states in some of the papers he's written that if Flandern never came along, he may have never looked at any of this at all, which is it's crazy and disturbing to consider that one person can make such a domino effect, such a butterfly effect that could lead to so many other things. And so they're trying to figure out, what is this object? Is this object real? And they're looking at the IRIS probe data from 1983, and they saw the images, and they're looking at the data from Pioneer 10 that's some object that's perturbing it out there. And so Harrington, he's convinced that the Planet 9 is real. Okay. So he takes us like a secret trip. I think it was only with himself and is possibly someone close to him. But he takes a trip all the way down to New Zealand because he determines that it's the only location that this object can be seen from because of the way that it's coming in. And that is true. And so he travels to New Zealand, and he goes to a place called Birch Point. And in 1993, he has an 8-inch telescope, and he's pointing it using the data he knows. Remember, the space is vast. What you look at in the night sky and then try to focus on is such a minute thing that if you don't know exactly where to look, you can miss an entire planetary object or whatever by what seems like to us almost nothing. Go ahead.
Let me make a comment on that, because I've got a pretty nice Celestron 8-inch telescope as well. It's the 8SE, and the thing I've got digital numbers that I can put in to track it digitally, right? But also, like, even if I'm just looking at the sun or the moon,
yeah,
you would think you could just kind of go, boop, there it is. You have to line that bad boy up right on just to get the sun or the moon even, I mean, that's otherwise right. It's big time. So
that's why no one can find it. If you don't know exactly where to look during a certain time period, you can't see this object because it's so far out in our outer solar system. Okay, so if anyone's ever seen the movie Deep Impact, I don't know if that movie was directly like a little bit of a hint towards this story, but it's strikingly, it's eerie how similar that story of Harrington is with the beginning of that movie. Because Harrington travels to New Zealand secretly, and he sees this object in 1993, and he basically rushes back to his lab. I don't know, someone should probably watch that again. And he gets all this data, and he's putting it through his computer and all these things. And within a short amount of time, within a couple of years of him being able to actually get all of his data in through the, scientific papers and stuff, he's dead. He's dead of throat cancer. Okay. And out of the blue too, completely out of the blue, just like Rex knows, all these important figures they seem to just mysteriously die. It's either suicide or it's some kind of cancer or something like that. Always. It's the same story. So Harrington, I think unquestionably was murdered. Okay. And a lot of people don't like to hear that, but when you understand why he was murdered, you'll see more clearly. Why would you cover something like this up? Well, if society learned that there was another planet on just outside our Kuiper Belt that loved to just come through in these cycles of orbits and just throw comets and asteroids towards Earth that have caused extinction level events, they might freak out, wouldn't they? And that's one of the main reasons I think that they haven't told people, is that it's both connected to so many destructive events, and it may also be connected to the Anunnaki. And so there's a lot of multiple reasons why this information is so critically important. So now and after he died, and this is one of those things that it's really sad and almost makes me angry. But NASA came back and they said years later that all the data from Thomas Van Flandern and Robert Harrington was all simply mathematical error. That's what they said, and they just buried the whole thing. And most people forgot it. All of it existed until 2012. And again, that's not even that long ago. But that's when this whole thing started up again. And a lot of people haven't possibly heard about this. This is not a very well-known fact. But so in 2012, there was an astronomer from the National Observatory of Brazil. His name was Rodney Gomez. Okay, and he was studying the Kuiper Belt and the influences and the positions of the comets and the asteroids and how they're acting in the Kuiper Belt. Okay. And he came to determine, based on the calculations by Robert Harrington and Flandern, he came to determine that there was undoubtedly something disturbing all of these comets and asteroids in the Kuiper Belt. Not only that, but it was creating this defined line that was holding a lot of the Kuiper Belt in the placement that it's in now. Remember, the planets and the rotations they have been that way so long that they're all part of a balancing act. It's a very precise balancing act. And asteroids and comets represent the pool balls of the pool table. And they are the ones that get thrown around based on slight little shifts and slight movements. And that's essentially what happened. So Zecharia Sitchin mistranslated the 3,600-year orbit of this object. But Robert Harrington actually came up with a completely different figure, Rex. I don't know if you know this yet, but Robert Harrington and Flandern came up with a figure that's somewhere around a 10,000-year orbit. And that doesn't mean it's necessarily that exact number. That was what he was just hypothesizing based on what the data he was looking at. It just means that the orbit is much longer than we had originally had thought. Okay? So you get this object that's passing through, and it's disrupting everything in the Kuiper Belt, right? And I want to show the Kuiper Belt. This image of the more orange area is the size of the Kuiper Belt in relation to our solar system. And there you can see Aries at the top, just past it. And that's where, beyond that is where this planetary object exists. Now, a lot of people may have heard of Hale-Bopp, Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet is one of the most studied comets that has a highly probable influence from this object. So when all the times that's gone by Earth and everything, you can actually look into people like the Anglo-Saxons of Great Britain who have studied and shown images of Hale-Bopp Comet. And there are even maybe clues where they talked about how there was some kind of object that was perturbing that they may have even known about long ago. So there's all this data that exists out there, okay? Now, today, NASA has just launched the New Horizons mission that goes out just beyond Pluto and the Kuiper Belt. I wonder why, Okay, it's none of this happens for no reason at all, and they know, and it's only a matter of time before something like this is actually revealed to the public. And so Robert Harrington and Thomas Van Flandern, they died or they were murdered, and their information and legacy was nearly lost, and most had never even heard of them. So I want to bring their important contributions forward, as well as some of these other researchers, like Rodney Gomez, that I want to just show this for. So let's move on, because we have to understand that this object, 4 to 8 Earth masses that exist beyond our Kuiper Belt. So just picture every time it swings through, either through our Kuiper Belt or near it. I think the passes probably do somewhat change. But based on that, it has both a gravitational effect on all the planets in our solar system, causing like this friction heat up, which is what I believe we're seeing right now with Hawaii and the tectonic plate movements, slight movements, and the magma that's coming up all over the Earth and earthquakes. I think that's what they're referring to right now. That's why so many governments have built so many bunkers. They knew that this object beyond our Kuiper Belt was going to come close during this time period, and it was going to lead to impacts. And right now, the biggest impacts that are occurring are through volcanic and earthquakes. But if some will remember, over the last 6 months, how many meteorites have people seen shooting through the sky? I've seen reports of some that have landed in next to where I am, landing in like the mountains and causing fires and all these things. I've never heard of that in my lifetime. And I know I've only lived for 34 years, but there's some unusual things going on right now with activity from space. And I think it's all related. Okay. And so I just want people to understand that Planet 9 is very real, and that events like the deluge that we talk about in the Atrahasis that I'm going to go into in a few minutes, those events were likely related to this. In fact, most of these extinction level events may be related to this. But let's shift gears now, okay? Let's look into what the Sumerians knew, okay, about our solar system and about who these beings are, because right now I want to protect the truth, and I don't want the idea of mistranslations to get in the way of what really is happening and what really has happened. And so I want to jump to these beings that have a lot of stigma in our past. And for anyone that wants to look into some of the stuff that talks about them, I highly recommend reading the Book of Enoch, talking about the Watchers. And then I highly recommend reading things like the Nag Hammadi scriptures, talking about the archons, these rulers of our reality, and as well as all the cuneiform writings and many, many, many other places that discuss the fact that there are some kind of advanced beings that came here long ago. And not only do they actually control our domain of Earth, but they actually have been responsible for manufacturing our reality here to keep us in a certain state, like this controlled farm world of people. And so when you read things like the Sumerian Kings list, and you read about a lot of what they said in the past, they mention how kingship was lowered from heaven, and they mention all of these things about these beings coming from long ago, and and so you look at things like the VA 243 from the Sumerians, showing all the planets of our solar system, and how there's a lot of argument right now over what exactly they're showing, except most fail to bring up the more important point of how could these Sumerians, if they were influenced by no one, how could they have possibly known about the planets of our solar system before the invention of the telescope? It almost goes back to the problem of the Dogon with Sirius, being influenced and knowing all about Sirius. That stuff just can't happen unless you get some kind of an influence. And that's all this simply is. So things like the Sumerian King list, they talk about how there was once great cities hundreds of thousands of years ago that were built, places like Eridu and Sharupak, that were completely destroyed by the flood. And we got to understand that there's these two terms that we have to know, which is called pre and post-diluvial. before and after the flood. And that occurred somewhere, again, there was probably multiple disasters that occurred, but somewhere between 10,500 and 12,800 years ago. And that was essentially when these cities like Eridu and Shuruppak and all the kings mentioned in the Sumerian kings list, that's why they were wiped out and disappeared. And it goes on, and the Sumerian king list goes on to say that after the deluge, kingship was once again lowered to the city of Kish. So Kish represented the first city that was then created in Mesopotamia after the flood. That's why it says that in the Sumerian king list. It actually gives very helpful information towards understanding how these advanced civilizations like Atlantis and Sumer had all this technology and knowledge before, but lost all of it. And this is completely tying into the pyramids of Giza too. This represents this lost time period when ancient civilizations were wiped out, again, because the Kuiper Belt gets periodically disrupted, as well as the gravitational influences on our planet. You get things like a pole shift, you get asteroids and comets striking like ice caps that are miles high, and that's how you get these disasters like happened in the past. So this is where we get to the reading I really want to go over that ties all of this together, okay? We need to understand that this is the Atrahasis tablets, okay? They're pieces of tablets that were all put together, and they all have different stories that talk about what occurred in the past. Now, this is important because, like the Sumerian king list, okay, it mentions who this being was, who created this Atrahasis. Atrahasis' name was Zayasudra or Ubar Tutu, and there's a whole bunch of names that he had way back in the day. But he was a king of the king of Shuruppak, which represented the pre-diluvial period before the flood. Okay, so Noah, this Atrahasis figure that was a king that existed, he recorded these events that occurred, and he left them behind. And by the way, the Atrahasis tablets, I don't know if a lot of people realize this is something that's not very well known, but these cuneiform tablets in many cases don't simply represent one version, as in they could be manipulated because it's just one single copy. In the case of the Atrahasis and things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, there are actually multiple copies that have been found in different cultures. Like the Babylonians, they found some, and then they found some up in the Assyrians in like the Library of Ashurbanipal, saying the exact same thing. They knew the importance of keeping this information recorded, so they put it in multiple places, and that only gives credibility towards it, in my opinion. But here's what I want people to understand. Very, very important. Zechariah Sitchin got most of his base information right. But what I'm about to read to you are translations that were not done by him at all, okay? They were done, in fact, the first translation that I'm going to read to you going through this was done in 1849, long before Zechariah Sitchin ever did. The reason I want to bring that up and read it is that it talks about this disaster that occurred, and it also mentions all these very important names like the Anunnaki, that they call themselves the Anuna. I don't know if some people know that. The term Anunnaki is simply the name that the Sumerians gave them. They're called the Anuna, but they're called Anunnaki because Ki is the name they call Earth. That's why Enki's name is Enki. See, he used to be called Ea, but once he became the Lord of the Earth, he became Enki, just like the Anunnaki. They got that name because they became the rulers of our planet. That's where they took that name. But they refer to themselves as the Anuna, and you'll see that in the translation about the dew. So this Atrahasis has been found in Babylon and Sippar and Nineveh, and this translation was done in 1876 by George Smith. This guy was a master. He was an expert Assyriologist, and he went through and he compared all of his vast knowledge, and he put this translation together that I'm about to read to you. And later on, years and years later, a woman named Stephanie Daly came along, who is an Assyriologist expert who teaches in London, and she took George Smith's translations and she not only revised them but confirmed they were basically perfectly accurate. Okay, so I want to get that point made because I think a lot of things have been lost in translation to some. So I want to read a piece of the Atrahasis. Remember, it's many, many, many tablets, including the origins of mankind. But this is from a section that talks about the deluge. And this is not just talking about the deluge, but also talking about there's certain roles that these beings played. And I want you to listen very closely to what I'm about to read. Okay? So in the Atrahasis, it states, 600 years, less than 600 passed. The country became too wide, the people too numerous. Enlil grew restless at their racket, listening to their noise. And again, noise is representing language, okay? He addressed the great gods. The noise of mankind has become too much. I'm losing sleep over their racket. Give the order that Surupu disease shall break out. Cut off food supplies to the people. Let the vegetation be too scant for their hunger. When the 6th year arrived, the people's looks were changed by starvation. Only 1 or 2 households were left. Their faces were covered in scabs like malt. The people stayed alive by holding on to life. Enlil became furious and fetched Enki. We, the great Anuna, all of us, agreed together on a plan. Anu and Adad were to guard above. I, Enlil, was to guard the earth below. Where you went, you were to undo the chain and set us free. That's there. He's talking about Enki right there. Okay. Undo the chain and set us free. I want you to think about that after too. You were in control. You were in charge of control and holding the balance. But instead, you gave wisdom to the people and knowledge. Your creations have become too numerous and despoiled the earth. You imposed your loads on man. You bestowed noise on mankind. Language again. You slaughtered a god together with his intelligence. You must swear an oath to the end, to create a flood on earth and wipe away all of life. That's Enlil talking to Enki, okay? Now, it goes on. I'm jumping a little bit because it's a very long pieces of writing here. But it goes on to say, the winds were raging as Atrahasis cut the rope to release the boat. Then the flood came and no one could see anyone else. They could not be recognized in the catastrophe. The flood roared like a bull, like a wild ass screaming. The winds howled. The darkness was total. There was no sun. For 7 days and 7 nights, the torrent, storm, and flood came on. The goddess Mami watched and wept. By the way, her name was Ninmah or Isis in Egypt. However could I, in the assembly of the gods, have ordered such destruction on them? After the noise of the flood had subsided, the warrior Enlil spotted the boat of Atrahasis. He was furious. We, the great Anuna, all of us, agreed together on an oath. No form of life should have escaped. How did any man survive the catastrophe? Anu made his voice heard and spoke to the warrior Enlil. Who but Enki would do this? Enki made his voice heard and spoke to the great gods. I did it in defiance of you. I made sure life was preserved. Exact your punishment from the sinner and whoever contradicts your order. A man survived the catastrophe. It's pretty wild, isn't it, Rex?
It just gave me the chills. That's beautiful because Enki was sticking up for us again. And it makes me think about all the times and all the tablets that I've read. I've probably read 100 or so tablets that are translated via Oxford University of the Sumerian tablets.
Yeah.
And Enki is the one that Inanna went to get rescued from the underworld. She went to Enlil and I can't remember who else. And they were like, no, she made her decision. She's staying down there. And then Enki had compassion. And then there was somebody else that Enki had compassion.
It was Enki Ningshita.
Wow. Yeah. It's incredible.
So we need to take away from that several things. One, these Anunnaki are part of a council. It's called the Council of 12. Okay. Think of a royal council of these great gods who includes both female and male. That's why I mentioned Mami, which is where the origins of the word mother come from. Her name was Ninmah or Isis in Egypt. Okay. And some of them talk about how they're completely appalled at the decision that they had allowed to occur, to to allow themselves to come up with a solution that would literally wipe out this divine species of mankind from the planet. That was Enlil's plan, because he felt like this experiment of consciousness in humanity had become out of control, because to them, we were considered just workers. Now, I want to just go back to one point that I think is one of the most important things of all that I said before. And it said where Enlil tells Enki, he says, where you went, you were to undo the chain and set us free. Okay? That is an extremely difficult thing to wrap your head around. And what I'm talking about in the next book extensively is that it actually references them taking over the entire realm of our reality, not only from an energetic standpoint, but from information standpoint, from many, many, many levels, where it's very difficult to understand, but there may have been some kind of an ancient grid that was created on the earth long, long ago, and they've disrupted and taken over whatever this model that used to exist here of reality. They took over and took over our realm. Now, between these gods that came here, who are so advanced, again, I got to point out, they have the ability to exist as non-physical, okay? They can actually incarnate into human beings and play the roles as them, as well as other entities as well. That's another area I got to point out that in the Emerald Tablets Thoth talks about too, is that there's these sides of both these Anunnaki beings and some others who don't want the ascension of humanity, because think of it this way. Enlil calls us the beast. He calls us the beasts, as in like these primitive primates. And to them, their DNA and their royal bloodlines, like we see today, still preserved, like the kings and pharaohs always did, all the way down through these royal families. They're obsessed because they think they're better. They think their bloodline and their DNA makes it so they're superior. So Enlil, to have the idea that their gifts were given to a beast like us is completely embarrassing to him in any way, in many of them, and they don't think that we ever should have gotten those gifts in the first place. So a lot of this war and things that have occurred was possibly a way to try to wipe out this spark that's inside us, this higher consciousness that we have. And so these Anunnaki gods, like we just read, the whole point of this war of the eagle and the serpent that I talk about so much is it represents this divide between these Anunnaki beings who had certain symbols they used, and they both either felt like they wanted to help humanity, like Enki was just mentioning, saving humanity and giving them language and higher consciousness, or using them as simply just some kind of a controlled labor force in this realm of our earth and nothing more. And that's what this war has been, with empires rising up and fighting against one another, and how each side has been in turmoil and using human civilizations to basically fight their wars for them. So we have to look at all of this from a high level perspective and understand that, you know, all this silly little fighting over our little borders and you know, differences in that we each perceive that we have, none of that matters. You know, we're all just people of Earth. We should be looking at it from a different perspective and move on to the next stage where we need to go, which is realize the importance of of humanity, and then come to this collaboration aspect. That's called, I don't know if anyone's ever seen The Beautiful Mind. It's called the Nash equilibrium. And it's the idea that instead of competing against one another, we could actually be the best we can in collaboration. And that's what I think you're going to see humanity finally get to that point and wake up and realize one day, where they say, oh, we have great scientists in Russia and the United States and Brazil and China and every place around the world. Why not just have everybody work together to make a better world? And that's what the Anunnaki don't want. That's the whole point of all the divisions and all the fighting and all of these illusions and distractions that they create and chaos in our reality, is that so humanity will not become unified, so that we'll realize of, you know, these hidden controllers, like the Nag Hammadi scripture says, basically. So I want to close by saying that I really appreciate all the support everyone gives, and you know, check out my YouTube channel if you ever get a chance. It's at Matthew LaCroix. And as Rex said, I have a book called The Illusion of Us. And I want everyone to know that I'm sorry that I'm not more active in my YouTube channel currently, but I'm trying to, as hard as I can, finish this book before the end of the year and get this published, because I know how important it is. And to me, I have difficulty focusing on two things at once. I can't keep doing videos and then writing. I have to do one or the other. So I'm going to get the book done and do some shows here and there, but my focus is always going to be getting to the truth no matter what.
I've got to tell you, Matt, that's why I like you, because getting to the truth isn't that what it's about?
I'd like to think so.
And some people get stuck in their own minds. They get stuck in their own boxes. So it's great when you can break out of it. I mean, I can't think of how many different times that I've done research on previous topics, and I've been like, oh, okay, maybe there's something else to that. Oh yeah, maybe I was wrong. So I'll come up with another podcast. And say, hey, there you go. It's like, it's a great way. So I don't stick to something just because I said something. I'm okay with being wrong. And when people give me a hard time about it, I understand. I appreciate that. But were you correct 100% every single time you took a test in school? And they'll be like, yeah. And I'll be like, well, I don't have a rebuttal to that. So good for you. You're better than me. But thanks, Matt. It was great. And definitely, folks, check out The Illusion of Us. Can't wait to read your new book. You better send me out an autographed copy. I want to be one of the first ones.
You'll be the first one that I send an autographed copy to, Rex.
That'd be fantastic, Matt. Thank you so much. And also, if we can turn the screen share off for just a moment, I want to